Hello, Christ Community Church. This is my video version of the meditation that's in the newsletter for May the 3rd, May the 2nd? First one in May. How's that one? How's that for an explanation? And I thought I'd share with you some of what we looked at very briefly in the pastoral search team meeting that we had on Thursday evening by video. It's our actual third meeting already, so we're making good progress in me sharing some teaching and some things that they need to know, and then sorting out the plans for the process that is to come. I'd like to read to you from Samuel, and I didn't. 1 Samuel 3, the first 11 verses. So what I looked at with the team, although I only mentioned the others, is the concept of a call or a calling. Because we were talking about how it can be interesting to ask a prospective pastor to share their sense of their calling. How did God make it clear to them that they were called to be a minister? And even you could follow that up with a question of how do you discern whether a call that a church extends to you, how do you hear God's voice? How do you discern God's voice in that? It's an interesting story. It's slightly different for each person. And so I shared that I'd always, since I was a boy, been very curious about the story of the call to Samuel. I first heard it when I was a boy, and it's one of those Bible stories that just grabbed me. And I still, although I know a little bit better, I still wonder how this works, these people that God speaks to. I have had what I think is experience of that, but as a boy I hadn't. The boy Samuel, I'll start at verse 1, ministered before the Lord under Eli. And of course, we know Samuel's backstory. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am," and then he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call, go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call, go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. What a line. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel a third time, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, I heard you call me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I'm about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears of it tingle." And so, unfortunately, Samuel gets a rather unpleasant message that he has to share with Eli. Man, that must have been tough for that kid. But it's a consistent theme of the Old Testament that being God's messenger is not always an appreciated thing, not always pleasant. And so Samuel learns that as well. But he does learn to hear the voice of God. So some other good call stories are the one of Moses and the burning bush, which we've looked at together. And Isaiah's call is another one that fascinates me, although that was later in life. Isaiah 6 is actually one of my ordination theme passages, where we read as the core of the incident depicted there, Isaiah saying, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here I am. Send me.'" But there's a lot of difficulty that goes around that. And there's a wonderful song that we sing that goes with that as well, which was one of the 2 theme songs for my ordination service. Here I am, Lord. Send me. In the New Testament, one to look at is the story of Saul, who became Paul. It's a call story. In the Samuel account, he's just a boy, and not many people had good relational contact with God, we're told. He and old prophet Eli are ready to wind down for the day, ready to go to sleep, and Samuel hears a voice calling to him, and they're the only ones in the temple, so he runs over to see what Eli wants. He'd been given by his mother. He was received as a special gift by his mother Hannah, and she, following her commitment, had handed him to God for service in the temple. And so he was there to serve under Eli and to learn how to serve God in that place. He goes and Eli has not called for him. Now that happens 3 times. And then Eli realizes God must be wanting to talk to the boy. That must be what's going on. And so he gives Samuel some instruction as to how to respond if it happens again. It's instruction that's relevant for us too. It's so hard for us in this day and age to create quiet places where everything's falling still and we can hear God's still small voice and then say, "What do you have to tell me?" Rarely do we leave time in a prayer time, particularly a congregational prayer time, or do we create a space in collective worship where everyone has settled into that quiet and just waits and listens. So Samuel goes back to his place and he does what he's told, what he has been instructed, and God calls him again. And yeah, like I said, it's kind of shocking to discover that the poor kid gets a harsh message to deliver. But in receiving that message and in responding with, "Speak, Lord," he learns to recognize that voice. He learns how this begins to work. So that's one of the things this story illustrates or teaches, is that hearing God can at times become a rare thing among his own people, among his followers. When a people and her leaders wander away from deep, consistent relationship with God, as Eli had and Israel had more so, then the art, it's not a science, the art of hearing God's still small voice, take a look at 1 Kings 19 verse 12, can be lost. In Kings there, it's pointed out that God's voice comes in a whisper, not in thunderclaps and drama. That the art of hearing God's voice can be lost in a community. Those who God would speak to need to learn how that works, as Samuel had to. I think it's slightly different. In fact, I don't just think so. I'm pretty sure it's slightly different for each person. And so that makes it dangerous to tell one's own story of how it works, lest people think it's a prescription. What needs to happen is the openness, the receptiveness that Eli taught Samuel to have. Hey, if you think something's pulling at you, then pause and say, "Lord, is that you? Can you make it clearer for me?" Or whatever comes to mind for you as you submit to that process. Not many get a burning bush or a blast of light that knocks us off a horse. And it's dangerous, I believe, to look for God only in the drastic. Have you ever met a person like that, that wants to make even the very small a drastic act of God? That could be, but they almost seem addicted to the drama and the drasticness of it. My personal experience is that the Spirit is subtle. Subtle, subtle, subtle. The Spirit is understated most times. The Spirit is not Hollywood. The key is to learn to look and listen for it, and then set all else aside when you catch it, and respond with willingness as indicated when we speak. When we say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Lord, I think you're trying to get my attention here. What's going on? And then watch what comes to mind and heart. It's tricky, again, to give examples, but for a lot of people, it'd be like a thought of a person you went to high school with, and or someone that you haven't seen for months, and suddenly you get this kind of, I think I'm supposed to call them. That's so weird, right? But if you are learning to hear that voice and recognize it, sometimes it's just a thought that we have because a person came to mind because we saw a car like the one they used to drive. Sometimes it's that. But sometimes it is God putting that person on our heart. And when we learn to take those small steps of risking a bit of foolishness to follow up, there are many stories out there of someone who then makes that phone call and finds out the person just got bad news that they can help them pray with them even about. But it needs to be learned. And it's not easy to discern. Once that has started to happen, the awareness and the hearing and the learning to say, "Speak, Lord, because I think it's you and I'm listening, I'm ready," then we need to learn to trust it, even if it seems weird. And trusting, we can often find out there was something there. And so God teaches us over time and practice the tone and timbre of his whispers in our hearts. And we gradually learn to recognize and follow. Try it. Listen for it. Watch it. Or even just put yourself in a quiet place. Read this story again from one of Samuel. And then lean back and say, "Lord, is there something you have to say to me?" We've identified a vision as a congregation. And we believe that the process that we used for that was guided by that voice, by God's word, speaking to and through us. But we need to keep paying attention and follow through as God speaks. Until we meet again, shalom and serenity to you all.